Jamboree Scouts are leaving the Saemangeum campsite to continue their exploration of Korea in other areas of the country. Today, we met some young British Scouts who took the time on their visit to Korea to remember the sacrifice of British soldiers during the Korean War. The nation is bracing for the approaching Typhoon Khanun, which could sweep through the peninsula, bringing torrential rain and gusting winds later this week. South Korea locked another current account surplus in June as imports fell greater than exports. It's August 8, 2023. This is News Center. Good evening. Thank you for joining us. I'm Yoon Jung-min. Young scouts gathered in South Korea's Saemangeum area have now left the campsite as Typhoon Khanun approaches. Putting aside disappointment, they will continue their exploration of Korea in other parts of the country. Choi Soo-hyung starts us off.
Starting Tuesday morning, all remaining participants at the World Scout Jamboree began leaving the Saemangeum campsite. The government stated that the decision to have them leave was made to ensure participants' safety as Typhoon Khanun is heading towards South Korea. Also, the government announced that they will activate their contingency plan for their departure and accommodation.
The total number of individuals is around 36,000 from 156 countries, and more than 1,000 buses are expected to be used.
The government has announced that they have prepared 4 police helicopters and approximately 270 police cars to escort the buses. The whole evacuation process was estimated to take around 6 hours.
They are disappointed to be leaving, but I think they understand the reasoning why.
A total of 128 sites, including university dormitories across 8 provinces and cities nationwide, will be used as emergency accommodation, not just to provide lodging, but also to experience Korean culture. This includes 17 in Seoul, 64 in Gyeonggi-do province, and 18 in Chungcheongnam-do province. The government has stated that it will do all it can to ensure the safety of the Scout members during the time they have left in the country and make sure they get the most out of the experience. Moreover, the postponed K-pop concert will be held at Seoul World Cup Stadium at 7 p.m. on Friday, right after the closing ceremony. The stadium can accommodate around 66,000 people, and the Culture Ministry says the lineup will soon be confirmed. And so, although the Scots were unable to finish their planned activities in Saemangeum, they will spend the rest of their trip in other parts of the country. Choi Soo-hyung, Arirang News.
As part of the Scout program for those who pulled out of the event, Jamboree participants from Britain had an opportunity to remember the sacrifice of British soldiers during the Korean War. Our Choi Min-jung met them.
A variety of tourism programs are being put on for World Scout Jamboree participants who decided to leave the Saemangeum camping site located on South Korea's west coast. As one of the alternative programs, the Ministry of Patriots and Veterans Affairs on Tuesday launched a 3-day peace camp for British Scouts so that they can still get the most out of their time in South Korea. Around 1,200 British Scouts are participating in the program until Thursday, where they will learn about the contribution of British soldiers who fought in the Korean War. Their first stop is Gloucester Hill Memorial Park in Paju. It was built in memory of the British soldiers who fought and died during the Battle of the Imjin River in 1951. Putting aside their disappointment, the Scouts pay tribute to their British military service members who sacrificed their lives during the Korean War.
It's an honour to be here. I'm speechless, to be honest with you, but it's an absolute honour to be here and to represent the UK as well. Is to be amazing.
I think it's great being able to experience this Korean culture, and it's nice to learn about it and see how the Koreans feel about it and see our involvement in it.
The program meant a lot to the unit leader as his grandfather actually fought in the Korean War.
Very emotional for me because he died last year, and also he was the first Scouter in our family. So to come to Korea with the Scouts and to be able to do this, incredibly special.
The Jamboree members also took a tour of the War Memorial of Korea and visited Seoul National Cemetery. The Veterans Minister said he hopes that the program will be a precious opportunity for the young British Scouts to experience South Korea, a country that was built through the sacrifice and dedication of troops 70 years ago. Nearly 4,500 British Scouts, the largest group of all the Scout contingents currently visiting South Korea, left the Jamboree site in Saemangeum for Seoul over the weekend, amid mounting safety concerns stemming from a sweltering heatwave and the oncoming typhoon. Choi Min-jang, Arirang News.
The sixth typhoon of the season, Khanun, is expected to make landfall on South Korea on Wednesday. Government authorities are now on high alert, raising its typhoon alert level to the highest serious. Kim Mo-gyun reports.
Typhoon Khanun is expected to make landfall on South Korea's southern coast as early as late Wednesday and proceed northward to North Korea, putting the entire peninsula under its influence through Saturday. The Korean Meteorological Administration says Khanun, which was heading north from the waters of Japan's Kagoshima as of Tuesday, is expected to first reach waters off South Korea's southernmost Jeju Island at 9 p.m. on Wednesday. Weather experts say once it makes landfall, the typhoon may remain very strong in intensity, with its central pressure forecast at 970 hectopascals and maximum wind speeds of up to 126 kilometers per hour. It's also expected to dump downpours of up to 500 milliliters nationwide. Weather agencies worldwide have forecast the typhoon to move towards the west as it ascends, which means there's a high chance of it directly affecting the capital region by late Thursday. Government authorities held a Central Disaster and Safety Countermeasures Headquarters meeting on Tuesday to discuss prevention measures. It raised its 4-tier typhoon alert level to the highest serious and initiated a level 3 emergency operation of the disaster response headquarters, which is also the highest. Officials called for all-out measures and regular checks on areas and facilities vulnerable to the rain, such as reservoirs, riversides, and underground parking lots. In the event of a flood, support will also be given to people with disabilities and senior citizens who live alone. The government will keep citizens aware of necessary forecasts regarding the typhoon and provide appropriate instructions through text messages and public broadcasts. As of 3 p.m. Tuesday, a typhoon advisory has been issued in coastal areas surrounding Jeju Island. The weather agency forecasts that warnings could expand to the upper parts of the country by Thursday. Kim Mo-gyun, Arirang News.
As Japan could start releasing Fukushima wastewater sooner than later, the Korean government says there's been a substantial degree of consensus during the latest working-level meeting with Tokyo. This as President Yoon had earlier requested to have South Korean experts join in monitoring. Bae Eun-ji has more.
The government explained Tuesday that a certain degree of consensus has been reached regarding Seoul's request concerning Tokyo's wastewater release plan during a virtual meeting held the day before between officials from South Korea and Japan.
Considerable consensus was reached yesterday at the working level on ways to implement what was discussed during the latest summit between the leaders of South Korea and Japan.
He also said that another round of working-level talks will be held before finalizing ways to cooperate on the matter, and said this meeting will be scheduled through diplomatic channels. The two sides held their first round of such talks in Tokyo in late July, after President Yoon made 3 requests to Prime Minister Fumio Kishida during their summit on July 12. First, to include South Korean experts in monitoring the Fukushima wastewater release. Second, to share monitoring information in real time. And third, to halt the release process if the concentration of radioactive materials surpasses agreed-upon levels. Tuesday's remarks come a day after Japanese media reported that Tokyo plans to start releasing wastewater from the destroyed Fukushima nuclear power plant as soon as late August. Citing unnamed government sources, the Yomiuri and Asahi Shimbun said the release will likely come shortly after Prime Minister Kishida meets with U.S. President Joe Biden and President Yoon Suk-yeol next Friday for a 3-way summit in Washington, where Kishida is expected to explain that the wastewater is indeed safe. But a senior official from Seoul's foreign ministry reportedly said the 3 countries have not discussed whether or not to include the wastewater issue on the agenda for the trilateral summit. Bae Eun-ji, Arirang News.
On the local economic front, Korea's current account remained in the black for the second month in a row in June as imports dropped deeper than exports. Our correspondent Shin Ha-young covers the latest findings.
South Korea's current account was in the black again in June. Preliminary data released by the Bank of Korea on Tuesday shows the country posted a current account surplus of $5.87 billion. This is the second straight month that a surplus was recorded, and it was even greater than in the month before. The surplus growth comes on the back of wider gains in trade and investment. The goods balance, which tracks the imports and exports, saw a surplus of $3.98 billion in June, recording a surplus for the third consecutive month. The country exported around $54 billion worth of goods, an on-year decrease of 9.3%, plunging for the 10th month in a row. By category, shipments of chips, petroleum products, and industrial chemical products slipped, while auto exports rose by over 60% from the previous year. On the other hand, the drop in imports was greater than that of exports, as the cost of importing raw materials dropped due to lower energy prices. A rise in dividend income from Korean subsidiaries located overseas also contributed to the current account surplus. Meanwhile, the deficit in the service account, which tracks earnings and spending on overseas trips and transport, came to around $2.6 billion as more people traveled abroad. The accumulated account balance for the first half of this year is in the black by some $2.4 billion.
Even under challenging external conditions, the fact that the trade balance has maintained a surplus in the first half of a year for 12 years in a row holds significance. Unlike the initial projections of a deficit in the first half of this year, the country performed well.
Regarding the outlook for the current account in the second half of 2023, the experts said that it's difficult to forecast due to the uncertainties such as global oil prices, the pace of economic recovery in major countries, including China, and recovery in the IT industry. Shin Ha-young, Arirang News.
China's exports recorded a double-digit on-year plunge again in July, this time by 14.5%. According to China's Customs Administration on Tuesday, exports last month fell to $281 billion, the worst fall since the onset of COVID-19 pandemic in February 2020. Exports dropped back sharply starting from May this year after an upturn in March and April, while imports dipped by 12.4% in July, one of the biggest declines in recent years. China's global trade surplus was reduced by over 20% in July from a year earlier. Russian missiles reportedly struck the center of Ukraine's Pokrovsk on Monday night, killing at least 8 people and injuring dozens. Chung Eun-ju has the latest about the war in Ukraine.
Russian missiles struck the city of Pokrovsk in Ukraine's Donetsk region twice on Monday night, killing at least 8 people, including 5 civilians. Regional Governor Pavlo Kyrylenko and other Ukrainian officials said in a statement that 67 others were injured, including 29 police officers, 7 rescue workers, and 2 children as of 7 a.m. on Tuesday. According to the governor, the strikes, which targeted the Ukrainian portion of a region partially occupied by Russia, occurred within 40 minutes of each other. The attack damaged 9- and 5-story buildings, residential houses, a hotel where foreign journalists used to stay, dining establishments, shops, and administrative buildings. Regarding the missile strikes, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky said in his nightly address that he will hold Russia accountable for the attack. His remarks accompanied footage of a damaged 5-story residential building with 1 floor partially destroyed. Separately, the head of the Ukrainian presidential office said Monday that Russian strikes hit private homes and killed at least 2 civilians in the Kharkiv region. A military official added that Russian shelling struck a 9-story residential building in the southern city of Kherson, killing 1 person and wounding at least 3 others. The deadly attacks came just a day after officials from around 40 countries gathered in Saudi Arabia to find a peaceful resolution to the war in Ukraine. Meanwhile, the Ukrainian Security Service announced Monday it had detained an alleged Russian informant in connection with a plot to assassinate President Zelensky. Chung Eun-ju, Arirang News.
BTS member V's first solo album, Layover, will be released next month on the 8th. Announced by his agency Big Hit Music on Tuesday, the album titled Layover will consist of 6 tracks, including 1 bonus track. The album's lead-off song is Slow Dancing, a 70s romantic soul-style track with a laid-back and free-spirited feel. 5 music videos will also be released, while a bonus track is an instrumental version of Slow Dancing played on piano. V is the last member of BTS to release a solo album, which he is working on with Adore CEO Min Hee-jin, the producer of girl group New Jeans. South Korea's Labor Ministry just last week unveiled its proposal to employ 100 nannies or home helps from overseas, possibly as early as this year as part of a pilot scheme. Today, we delve deeper into this issue. Joining me is our political correspondent, Lee Si-hoo. Thanks for coming on, Si-hoo.
Hi, Jung-min.
Si-hoo, what does the government plan? This plan change the current immigration and employment policies?
So the plan is to issue non-professional employment visas to workers from overseas. Currently, only non-Koreans who already possess long-term visas are legally able to work in this field. That includes those who are on long-term visas through marriage to a Korean national or non-Korean nationals who are ethnically Korean and have an overseas Korean's visa. Now, the work visas to be given to foreign workers would restrict them from switching fields of employment.
Right, and help us understand what it means for the country's low birth rate.
As we know, South Korea's total fertility rate last year recorded a record low of 0.78, and that's the lowest in the world. As for the capital, Seoul, the rate was at 0.59, which is not even half of the OECD average. This is why Seoul City is especially keen on this issue, and also why the pilot project will begin in Seoul. Now, the cost is also another motivating factor. Currently, Korean workers in the field are usually paid around 15,000 Korean won per hour, or around $11 if they commute, and around 3.5 to 4.5 million won a month if they live with a family. But according to the government's plan, foreign workers will be paid much less, equaling around minimum wage, and will have to commute. The government is hoping that this would help parents with childcare and encourage them to have more children, especially when many of the mothers also have day jobs.
And Si-hoo, I wonder how people are perceiving this change. What are the moms and dads' reaction to this? Are they welcoming?
Well, I got a chance to speak with some parents and also some couples. They mostly welcome the cost aspect, but there were some notable concerns. Let's take a listen.
I think with the not-so-good economic situation that we're facing, I think it would help if the cost side of things works out well.
I think more than that, policies that allow parents to look after their children themselves need to be implemented soon. Rather than employing foreign nannies, there could be policies allowing parents to leave work an hour earlier.
In childcare, interaction, emotion and culture play a big role. But South Korea does not have that cultural diversity at this moment in time, so I think it'd be a bit difficult to implement.
A working father and also a mentor for the Labor Ministry who provides real-life advice and feedback on the ministry's policy-making process echoes these concerns.
It's even difficult for those here in Korea, including the grandparents and neighbors, to thoroughly understand the mom and dad's parenting philosophy and accurately recognize the family's culture to be able to participate in childcare. The parents around me say they're worried whether the foreign workers will be able to join and participate in their family properly in what will be a unique environment.
Now, to alleviate these concerns, the government says there will be strict hiring requirements, including sufficient experience and knowledge in the field, age, linguistic capabilities, and clean criminal records.
And what are the advices to minimize cultural misunderstandings?
Well, a researcher who studies the effects of hiring these foreign workers highlighted that domestic care and childcare are different areas of expertise that require different skill sets and offer possible alternatives. Let's take a listen.
We could consider implementing a training system for those who have already spent a long time in South Korea, such as international students or foreign workers who are familiar with Korean culture and ways of life to work in these fields to help with any cultural clashes.
In regard to the cost of employing foreign workers, Dr. Lee said that government funding could help those in need.
Even if the minimum wage is applied, we could lessen the burden on parents by providing government vouchers for vulnerable social groups and ensure that foreign workers provide a quality service of work.
But what the experts and the parents all agree on is that comprehensive efforts should be made to create an environment where the parents themselves can take care of their children.
The priority should be fostering company and family culture that allows parents to take care of children through lessened work hours, parental leave, and without gender discrimination.
All right, we will have to keep an eye on future developments. Thanks, Shihu.
Thank you.
Along with the heat, South Korea is forecast to see some heavy downpours tomorrow. This round of rain will last until Friday, and gusty winds will also follow at times. Starting tomorrow, the entire nation will be under the influence of Typhoon Khanun. By Thursday, it is forecast to land on South Korea's southern coast, packing winds as fast as 35 meters per second. This is strong enough to push trains off the tracks, and on Friday, it may also pass through the Seoul metropolitan area. The typhoon will bring in a surge of heavy water vapors, causing nationwide rain. For eastern Gangwon-do province, severe downpours of up to 600 millimeters will batter the region. Southern regions, including Jeollado and Gyeongsang-do provinces, will see up to 300. The Seoul metropolitan area and the surrounding regions will see up to 150. There is a high risk of flooding and landslides, so please take extra precautions beforehand. Tomorrow, Seoul and Daegu will be starting off at 26 degrees Celsius. Rainy spells will dominate nationwide during the daytime. Highs in Seoul will get up to 33, Gwangju 34, Daegu and Busan will be topping out at 31 degrees. Central regions will see showers until Friday morning. That's all for now, and here are the weather conditions around the world.
That is News Center for tonight. Thanks for watching. A panel session coming up.
I'm Layover! 저를 도와주시는 분들이
저희와 함께 해주시는 세션분들
아무리 봐도 없지 펜션 같은데 아니라고 아무도 안 하는 거고
좋아요.
하나
하나, 둘, 셋.
Hey, Mr. Cupid, who's lying? Make sure you listen to what I say. I may be stupid or quite naive.
끝없이 쏟아지는 포토스팟. 휴대폰 한 대로 감당할 수 있겠니?
Arrow straight through my heart.
웰컴. 엄청난 에너지를 춤으로 뿜어내는 나라. 감당할 수 있겠니?
Busan, Korea is already reaching the entire world, like ocean waves that travel far and wide. It's Busan, the perfect World Expo city, transforming our world, navigating toward a better future.
에이턴! 안녕하세요, 에이턴입니다.
웰컴. 엄청난 에너지를 춤으로 뿜어내는 나라. 감당할 수 있겠니?
한국에 오면 먹어야죠.
먹어도 먹어도 끝이 없는 나라. 감당할 수 있겠니?
Hello everyone, it's Tuesday and you're watching Within the Frame. I'm Kim Bo-kyung.
Daily COVID-19 infections are continuing to surge with 50,388 reported per day in the first week of August, a more than 10% increase from the previous week. Now, due to the uptick, health authorities have decided to postpone classifying COVID-19 at the same level as the seasonal flu. COVID-19 is not the only health concern South Korea is dealing with. Heat-related illnesses have led to the deaths of around 20 people, while seasonal flu and respiratory illnesses are making people suffer from symptoms of cold. To discuss health issues people need to be aware of, we invite Professor Kim Moon-gyu from the Yonsei University College of Medicine. Professor Kim, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for being here. Now, first question. Daily average number of COVID-19 cases has been increasing for 6 straight weeks. Why are we seeing such resurgence?
Well, primarily we ease the quarantine measures, so that will be one of the reasons. And through this pandemic, we experienced some kind of a surge in summer times. That's common for almost every year, and we might consider that most of the people are in air conditioning and crowded places, and that can be another reason that people might be exposed to this coronavirus. Excuse me. And during the times, there are newborns who are not infected, not even exposed during the pandemic. So as I work in a pediatric emergency department, I see young babies, like a few months old. They were never born during the pandemic, so they got infected. And also among the adults or teenagers, we see patients with reinfection. Maybe because even though they had infection, the immunity started to wane after a few months. So that might be a new cause of new outbreaks. Well, we have to think about a new variant in this situation every time, because this coronavirus, very easy to make new variants. And if the new variant is a subvariant of Omicron, I think that it's not a big concern, but still we have to monitor the new type of mutations happening among populations.
Right. Since our Professor Kim talked about the new variant, the new subvariant, I'd like to delve a little bit deeper about this. So the new Omicron subvariant called EG.5 is reportedly responsible for more than 17% of the new cases over the past 2 weeks, according to the CDC. Now, what is this new COVID-19 strain and how dangerous is this?
Well, as I mentioned, if it's some subvariant of Omicron, we can review the subvariants of Omicron in the history, and thank God that none of them was that dangerous. So if it's still that kind of pattern happens, we have to watch carefully, but I'm hoping that it will not increase the mortality rate, even though it can have a high transmission rates.
Right, so it could have high transmission rates, but it will not affect the mortality rate that much.
That's my hope, yeah.
All right. Now, Professor Kim, due to the resurgence, South Korean health authorities decided to postpone the plans to downgrade the infectious disease level of COVID-19. Now, when do you believe the timing would be right? Should it be after Chuseok holiday season?
Well, most of the Korean hospitals do not have a facility to manage 2 kinds of outbreaks. For example, if you have a COVID-19 outbreak overlapped with influenza, that's a very, very difficult situation. And if you want to manage that, every patient visiting hospital should be stayed in an isolated, a private room, not a room with many beds. So we cannot deal with that kind of situation. So I think it's better to focus on some high-risk groups, like elderly people with underlying conditions, such as cancer, lung disease, diabetes, obesity, etc. And those people still can get really sick if they are exposed one more time to COVID-19. So those people should be really careful wearing masks, hand washing. If you meet somebody or go to a wedding party or whatever, have to be very cautious about that. And I hope that before Chuseok, we should solve one of the problems. Maybe influenza should subside, and maybe COVID-19 should subside also. So Chuseok is another big holiday, making people gathering around. And I really hope that we should not have another new variant emerging out of COVID-19.
Right, so either flu or either COVID-19 should subside so that we can handle the patients.
Yes.
All right, I see. Now, why don't we ask our fourth question to our Professor Song? We did not have a chance to introduce our professor, who is an Associate Professor of Preventive Medicine of Seoul National University. Welcome to the show, Professor.
It's great to be back.
All right. Well, Professor, if the infectious disease level of COVID-19 gets eventually downgraded, though we do not know when that's going to happen, what changes will be made?
Yeah, so the major distinction right now we have is that it's from level 2, and the proposed downgrade is to level 4, is that the major distinction is that the mandatory requirement, individual reporting of the new cases within 24 hours. And right now, those who are individually infected or are contacts of infected persons needs to be quarantined. At level 4, all of that goes away. So there's no mandatory requirement for reporting infected individuals, nor quarantining. What happens for level 4, which are influenza viruses, for example, is that there's a population-level surveillance. So there's going to be a sampling of individual patients out of our entire population to monitor and surveil the levels of the infection in our society. So that's really a significant change when we go down to level 4.
Right, I see. Now, staying on the COVID-19 front, Professor, though the World Organization of the Scout movement, expedited the departure of all participants from the campsite due to the typhoon coming, the activities are reportedly going to continue in Seoul and surrounding areas. Now, given that the participants are usually in large groups, what kind of preventive measures should they take?
Yes, it shouldn't be so different from what we've been practicing over the last 3 plus 4 years, right? That any congregate settings is a plain recipe for highly transmissible epidemic setting for COVID or any respiratory illness. So social distancing, obviously, is the most important measure. Obviously, that's going to be very difficult. What we need to think about, and if the camp organizers need to think about, is that anyone who's been infected or has symptoms of respiratory illness should first start wearing masks. Right? And then I wouldn't go all the way to quarantining them, but isolate them from group exercises. And then basically the other way to keep that levels going down in these congregate settings is to keep our sanitary personal hygiene measures up to the most highest level, right? So keep washing your hands, wearing your masks, and then carry your sanitizers and so on.
Right. Basic rules are sometimes best policies.
Yeah.
All right. Well, Professor Kim, I'd like to also tap on heat-related illnesses. So as the heat wave continued, it is causing illnesses and a lot of deaths, and as a result, the official heat-related death toll has already exceeded last year's. What types of heat-related illnesses are there, and what are their symptoms? Well,
there are many symptoms, but if you are too much exposed to sun, you may have a heat exhaustion, and you can have a sunburn on your skin, and you might have some headache because of dehydration and other symptoms you might have it. Well, I don't see this kind of patients a lot, but since I had a chance to join the Saemangeum Jamboree for 3 days as a voluntary doctor for the clinic, I really saw a lot of cases of heat-related problems, and that area is sandy and very hot and humid, and they have a lot of activities during daytime and even during the evenings and nighttime. And they are young and very energetic, so they don't care about their condition, and suddenly they collapse.
Oh.
I think that kind of thing happened during the first few days of that camp. And well, still, most of the participants were happy, as I can say, because I tried to ask them how they feel. And you know, they have, almost all of them have some bug bites on their legs, but still they're happy, they're really enjoying. In addition of symptoms that I mentioned, they have some kind of contact dermatitis, because there are many grasses that contact with skin and become very irritant and painful. And during the nighttime, they even have some sore throats and coughing of the weather change, because of the weather change. So when we visited there as a member of 18 doctors and nurses and every personnel, we prepared a lot of intravenous fluids and many kinds of medications. But well, most of the students improved just staying in the air-conditioned room, like in the clinic or some buses that served as a air conditioner. I think the weather was much worse than they expected, and I think they prepared for the bad, but was not for the worst. So many students got a problem. If they come back to cities like Seoul, I think they don't have to worry about those things. But I also saw many COVID-19 cases among the camp, and most of them were never infected during this pandemic. So I can tell that the participant of this camp, if they know that they have never infected with COVID-19 during this pandemic, they're going to catch COVID-19, because they're not going to keep distancing. All the activities is in group. So they are the most people should be cautious.
Right. Well, based on our Professor Kim's experience as being doctor at Saemangeum Jamboree, we have been talking about how participants had to go out on the fields and get some kind of heat-related illnesses. But usually those who get heat-related illnesses are those who are at the construction sites, and of course those out on the fields without shade, like you said. Now, what precautionary measures should they take?
Number one, water.
Water.
So during hot weathers, you have to sweat to cool down your temperature. And you can notice it, but sometimes you cannot know that you're already getting dehydrated. And you check your urine output, and if its amount is small, very concentrated, it's an alarming sign. You have to drink more water than that you think. So I recommend every 5 minutes or 10 minutes, try to drink some water as often as you can, and avoid direct sun exposure if you have to stay outside as a long time. And enough balanced food, and in between those working hours, you need a resting time. As I saw many buses in the Saemangeum Jamboree camp, that cooling bus is very effective to prevent heat exhaustions, and sometimes fever, and you can even have fever, and you can have headache and with vomiting. Those kind of symptoms continues, you better see your doctor before it gets worse.
Right, so basic rules are drink a lot of water, stay within the shade, and have resting time between your activities.
Yep.
Right. Now, Professor Sohn, I'd like to also talk about flu. So the number of flu cases is still high as well, and according to the data, the cases stood at 15 per 1,008 patients for the last week of July. Now, as far as I know, seasonal flu peaks in winter and fades away. Why is it still on the rise?
Yeah, so let me first kind of correct, not to correct what you just said, but the indicator you're mentioning, I think you need to have a clear reference. It's actually flu-like symptom outpatient visit numbers, right?
Oh.
And it's one of the monitoring indicators for us to look at, what the trends in flu and other viruses, viral illnesses circulate in our society. there are a couple of hypotheses, obviously. This summer surge and summer waves of flu has been seen in the U.S. previous years. And then they're sort of expecting it this year as well. We're seeing it this year. One of the hypotheses is that there's a lot of pool of susceptible population now because we've been so adherent to social distancing and mask-wearing policies, so that the influenza that's been circulating has not been able to infect us as much. So we have less and less people who've been previously exposed. So this sort of is particularly surging this year. And because there's a lot of travel, a lot of interactions and group interactions and movement, that's much more than so since we've entered the pandemic. So that's another recipe for high transmission rates for flu. The second issue is that the indicator you mentioned, the reason I corrected is because a lot of other viruses that's circulating in our society during summer months are adenovirus and human para-influenza viruses. These also have very similar symptoms, classical symptoms like cold symptoms, but also very similar symptoms to flu. So people have been exposed to that, and we have some data indicating higher levels of those viruses circulating in our society. So therefore, there's a lot more outpatient visits related to those symptoms. So that's what we're seeing right now.
Right, I see. Well, we'll come back to the other respiratory illnesses that our Professor Sung could talk about. But before that, Professor Kim, those with flu symptoms are concentrated mostly among, children and adolescents aged between 7 to 12 and 13 to 18. Why are people in that age bracket more vulnerable than other age groups?
I don't think they are more vulnerable in immunity. They are young and healthy. But during those 3.5 years of pandemic, they had to spend their, time. Should be very active, but they were kind of kept in some at home or they were limited activities only. So this year might be the first year, they enjoy junior high school years, and they had vacation, now in vacation. So there are many, many activities among them. I asked the students when the patients who visit the emergency clinic, what did you do? Why did this happen? And I get the answers. They are really crazy to play, enjoy their times. And also they have to study. Even though after school they go to the institutions, have to study on air conditioning situation in the crowded space. So they share all the viruses together. If one gets sick, the other's gonna get sick also. They really enjoyed it to go crowded areas with friends as a group. So I think this kind of pattern might continue for a while.
Right, I see. So it was mainly because of increased amount of activities.
Yes.
Right, I see. Now, Professor Sung, let's go back to respiratory illnesses such as adenovirus and HPIV that you have talked about. What are symptoms of those illnesses? How are they different from flu?
Yeah, so actually, in terms of symptoms, their initial symptoms are not so different, right? They all carry, a lot of them carry most of the common cold symptoms, obviously. Same with flu. Some of the details of the symptoms may be a little bit different, but again, I think especially for adenovirus, right, where it can infect essentially is the difference. And adenovirus compared to HPIV or flu, it can infect the cell lines of your eyes, intestines, and therefore give rise to pink eyes or diarrhea. So if you see those type of symptoms, they're a little bit different than maybe HPIV or flu. But generally, overall prevalence of the symptoms are really similar. So that's why it's really difficult to distinguish whether or not I got a COVID or flu or these other viral infections.
Right, I see. So in that case, do we have to go to doctor's clinic and get tested to see what exact illness I have?
So the rule of thumb is yes, but it's really going to be difficult for certain, if it's COVID, I think it's important to get treated. Especially if you're over 65, there are treatment options like Paxlovid. For HBIV, it's a little bit more like home therapy and other things. Unless it gets to the level of pneumonia and more serious respiratory illness, that's when you have to get a lot more intensive interventions. But most of these symptoms resolve within 5 to 10 days. So it's more about how you become more precaution about and monitor your status before you actually seek, and also making sure that you don't infect others around you.
Right.
So therefore, wearing a mask is very important.
All right. Well, Professor Kim, I believe this would be our last question. So what are there any precautionary measures that we can take to prevent, respiratory illnesses, COVID-19, and seasonal flu?
I think Professor Son mentioned all the important things. So I would like to add a few more things about the children. Children are not the high-risk group for COVID-19, so we don't give any special additional medication for them, just as same as other simple flus. If you get influenza, we can give you some medications for that situation after the test is positive. And there are some viruses causing respiratory symptoms and gastrointestinal symptoms like vomiting, abdominal pain, diarrhea. So they're having both, coughing with vomiting and diarrhea. So why this happen? Because of the water activities. They go to pools and fountains, they play. They get crazy, and suddenly they are exposed to water. They go into their mouth or maybe mucosa. So we see a lot of cases like that. So I would like to say that you should not drink accidentally, drink that. And if you get too tired, you get a more high possibility to get sick. So as I mentioned, need some resting times. And I tell the parents that they need some resting times between those activities.
All right, I see. Well, let's hope all of us could keep ourselves safe from all these illnesses, all right? Well, unfortunately, this is all the time we have for today's edition. Thank you, Professor Kim, for your insights. And of course, thank you, Professor Son, for your time and your insights. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right, that's all for Within the Frame tonight. We'll be back tomorrow with more in-depth stories. Thank you for watching, and goodbye.
Smart Biz Accelerators. Smart Biz Accelerators introduces Korea's small and medium-sized companies that have developed high-tech